This game was sent to the channel by Piko Interactive. In late 2021, the World Guinness Records granted Clockwork Aquario the award for longest development time for a video game. But now there's a good chance that Clockwork Aquario might be dethroned, and that's because Piko Interactive is about to release the Mega Drive version of Gem Power. Gem Power The Lost Dimension, or rather, Gem Power in Mutant Planet, was originally launched in 1992 for the Amiga and Atari ST by Logiciel, a French gaming company whose most well-known titles is probably Gem Power himself. Hi there, this is Future Stika, and I'm here to let past Stika know that Logiciel would actually go on to become Valet and Dubail, the French gaming studio responsible for all those impressive polygonal games on the Game Boy Advance. Back to you, past Stika. Anyway, the game would end up being ported to the Super Nintendo, and the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive port was in development as well, but never released, though an incomplete beta would eventually be leaked. In the mid-2010s, however, Piko Interactive acquired the rights to the Gem Power games with the intent of releasing it for the NES and all 16-bit systems. And now, after a period of development hell, the game should release sometime this year, with the publisher being kind enough to send me an early review copy. Now, the timeline is a bit iffy here, but if we start counting the Mega Drive port from 1991, the year in which the Amiga and Atari ST originals were launched, and stop at 2022, the year in which the Genesis and NES versions are set to launch, then this would mean that Gem Power was in development for 31 years, very narrowly beating out Clockwork Aquario. And I gotta say, it's really impressive how this might actually start becoming a trend, considering the recent revival of launching new games for retro systems. But perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. The game comes in a Sega Genesis or Mega Drive style packaging. The cover art is exactly the same as the one used for the original release for the Super Nintendo. And I quite like this cover, as it's detailed, colorful, and seems to be going for an 80s Flash Gordon vibe. In fact, I actually found out recently that this game was supposed to be a Flash Gordon game, but the developer and publisher could not secure the rights to Flash Gordon, so they simply went ahead and created their own hero, Gem Power. Hi there, Future Stika again. Turns out it's Buck Rogers, not Flash Gordon. The one thing that always bothered me about this cover was Gem Power's neck. I don't know, it just seems to me like your neck is not supposed to turn that far. On the back of the box we have some screenshots and a brief synopsis of the game. And it gives you this weird text about how the game is 3D and how it uses something called New Optics 3D graphics, and that the game can be enjoyed with or without 3D glasses. What? I have no idea what that's about. The game does not come with 3D glasses, and there's no mention about any of this in the manual or the game itself. Is it a joke? I mean, I know the Super Nintendo version billed itself as a 3D game because the scrolling was made in a way so that if you use full-fledged glasses, you'd kind of have the optical illusion of 3D. But the Sega Genesis version changed the scrolling, and as far as I know, the Sega version was not meant to have this effect at all. So I think it's a joke, but I'm confused. Inside, we find a manual and cartridge. The manual is quite good, as it's colorful and features a high-quality paper. It's entirely written as if you were being given a military briefing. The one thing I did notice is that it only describes some of your pickup items, not all of them, as I've gotten some items in the game that I still don't know what they're for. Though I should point out that the text itself is the same as the one used in the original Super Nintendo manual, which would explain the 90s style flavor. The cartridge is your standard Piko style cart. And by that I mean that while at first glance it looks like a regular Mega Drive or Sega Genesis cartridge, when you put it side by side with an official cart, you'll notice some minor differences, like the sticker being longer. Though this can either be a good or bad thing, depending on whether or not you want your cartridges to look like the real thing or have their own original designs. And although I'm not a hardware expert, the cartridge does seem to be beveled, something which a lot of aftermarket Genesis releases seem to miss, meaning that unlike some modern Sega releases, this game will not damage your cartridge slot. So, good job there, Piko! On the back of the cartridge, I did notice a spelling mistake in the mold and some weird spacing in the last sentence, but that's pretty minor, I guess. Now, again, I'm not a hardware expert, but thankfully I can open this cartridge and… well… this is it! I have no idea what I'm looking at, so if any of you know, please leave a comment. Overall, yeah, this is a pretty good packaging. Weird neck issues aside, I like the cover art. The manual is good and the cartridge is beveled. In the past, I've been pretty harsh on Piko before, including on games that they've sent me for free. But this is a pretty good packaging, so good job there, Piko. Booting up the game, you're quickly brought to the game menu with little fanfare, as all you get is the Piko logo and there's no intro, though it is nice to finally hear the game's soundtrack instead of that one song from the original leaked beta ROM. And once the game begins, just… wow! That is a lot of parallax scrolling. Like, between the various wave layers, the beach, mountains and clouds, I'm not even gonna try to count how many layers there are here. This is honestly impressive. There may not be an intro, but level 1 makes a great first impression with its backgrounds. Not only that, but there's all these little details that are easy to miss, but when put together, become greater than the sum of their parts. Like for example how the spikes keep moving up and down, which helps give the visual some energy. Or how it starts raining midway through the level. Now, the Super Nintendo version's parallax scrolling was made in a way that if you wore Polfridge glasses, it could kind of simulate a 3D effect. But it seems that this was either toned down or removed for the Sega version in most levels. On the whole though, I feel the scrolling on the Sega version is less prone to inducing headaches than the Super Nintendo version. But, make no mistake, chances are that if you're sensitive to this, you might still get a headache or two. Though I should point out that Piko Interactive is also releasing a new and improved version for the Super Nintendo, but I don't own that version, so any comparisons I make will be to the official release from the 90s. I also like that when you're inside a building, torches have this nice reflective effect. Ironically, there were some instances where the graphics were downgraded from the leaked beta. Like for example, how the grass does not flow anymore in the final release when compared to the unfinished leak. I mean, in many ways the graphics can be a bit basic, like how you have this mid-level boss which features no body animation. Though to be fair, this is a carryover from its Amiga and Atari ST days, as it was not uncommon for 16-bit computer games to have large enemies with little to no animation. Though, ironically, in this case, it's the Amiga and Atari ST versions that did have some very minor body animation, while the Sega and Nintendo ports didn't have any. Huh, weird. And if there ever was a doubt that Jim Power is a 16-bit Euro game, then one needs to look no further than your smooth running animation. Seriously, don't ask me why, but European developers loved smooth running animations. In fact, this is most likely one of the most European games I've played in a while. You can even make a bingo out of this. In fact, let's play that game in a new segment I like to call Is It European? Smooth walking animation? Check. Item pickups that do nothing besides add points? You betcha. Large characters with little to no animation? Oh yeah. Parallax scrolling flexes? You know it. An Amiga port or Amiga series? Of course. Keys to open doors? Damn right. Soundtrack composed by Huelsbeck? Wouldn't be a Euro game without him. And of course, the most Euro game design of them all, water droplets that kill you. All you're missing is the non-linear level design, the gradient backgrounds, and maybe the occasional puzzle. So, is it European? Yes! This game could not be more European, even if you had a Frenchman riding a bike while sipping tea on one hand and drinking German beer on the other. And, to be fair, being European myself, I grew up playing a lot of Euro PC games, so I'm all in on this style. And it's especially cool that when you beat a level, you go to a Shmup stage to fight a boss, followed by more traditional Shmup stages that are clearly inspired by R-Type. Then, a bonus Shmup stage where you collect coins, and finally, the cycle repeats again with another on-foot level, followed by the same amount of Shmup stages. You could almost say that this game is more of a Shmup than a run and gun. And you'd be right, though ironically the game works best when it's being a run and gun. More on that later. Now, Gem Power is often considered as one of the hardest Super Nintendo games out there, and the reason for that is the level design. You see, when bringing the game to consoles, the original developers decided to zoom in the action. So when you play Gem Power on an Amiga or Atari ST, the game is more zoomed out, giving you more room screen to see incoming threats and react to them. But in consoles, the action is so zoomed in that you barely have any time to react. And sadly, this issue is carried over to the Mega Drive port as well. Not only that, but enemies in the Amiga and Atari ST version also move much slower, which again gives you more time to react. In fact, it's not uncommon to be hit by an enemy that you've literally had zero warning about, so you're basically forced to memorize each level layout. And it seems that someone at Piko noticed this as well, because the Mega Drive version adds a gameplay feature that, as far as I know, is exclusive to this version and changes everything. Basically, instead of dying in one hit, you now get 2 hits per life. And this is a massive help. If anything, I wish they had gone even further with this and add yet another hit point per life, as this is still an incredibly difficult game. Hi there, Future Stika again. Turns out the MS-DOS version also had an extra hit point. Let this be a lesson to you all. Past Stika is always an idiot. Though now, I do feel that it is at least actually possible to beat it, as I was able to reach the final level without losing any credits. Now, as mentioned before, Gem Power is a Euro run and gun, for the most part anyway. In it, you can run, jump, shoot, duck, and that's pretty much it, really. Yeah, your move list is pretty limited. I mean, you can't even run and shoot at the same time. So every time you start shooting, your character becomes immobile. But because enemies come at you so suddenly, I've started using the tactic of always shooting while taking quick hops so as to not get caught by surprise. One interesting thing I found is how the Gem Power sprite changes depending on whether or not you're playing the console or the computer and PC Engine versions. In the Amiga, Atari, MS-DOS and PC Engine versions, Gem looks like a buffed up nerd with a mullet as seen in the PC Engine intro. But in the Super Nintendo and Sega versions, he looks more like your stereotypical action hero. In fact, on the PC Engine and 16-bit computers, the game is called Gem Power in Mutant Planet and featured a different box art. Whereas on Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, it's called Gem Power in Lost Dimension and the level design was slightly altered. In fact, turns out that the computer cover of Gem Power is a play on Jean-Claude Van Damme, whereas the console redesign is inspired by Dolph Lundgren. Throughout the game, you'll find several weapon power-ups, but these are kinda weird to be honest. As far as I can tell, there aren't any weapon types. Rather, you just pick up a power-up that progresses your character towards the next upgrade tier. And seeing as how you don't lose your current upgrades when you die, you just keep upgrading to the next weapon tier over and over. At least I think that's how it works, because the manual does not tell you how the weapon upgrades work. And you always get the same power-ups in the same order in every run. So as you pick up a new weapon upgrade, you just kinda need to adjust to your new attack behavior. So yeah, it's a bit weird, but nothing game-breaking or anything. You'll also pick up smart bombs, which are not screen clearers, but do cause a ton of damage to enemies around you while giving you invincibility frames. The caveat being that you cannot move while using it. Unfortunately, you should probably save these for specific instances. For example, there's a mid-boss on level 4 that has an attack that, as far as I know, is undodgeable. Basically, the boss keeps jumping around and extending its claws, but as far as I know, there's no way to avoid the claw attack during the third jump. So you have to time it just right with a smart bomb to avoid getting hit. If you're out of smart bombs or don't time it right, you'll get hit and either die or lose a point. Now to you, this may seem like a cheap hit or even poor level design, and you'd be right. But believe it or not, the on-foot segments are the better designed stages. I mean, yes, you have this boss and enemies that attack you with absolutely zero warning, but for the most part, it's all doable. It's when you get to the Shmup segments that the level and game design take a nosedive. But I'll get there in a sec. Once you beat an on-foot stage, you're brought to a boss fight which is always handled like a shmup. Here, you can move both vertically and horizontally, and if you reach the second half of the screen, your character will automatically turn, meaning that you can shoot from either side, and I like that. The bosses here tend to be absolutely massive, but despite their size, they're actually a cakewalk. The first boss has an easy-to-dodge pattern, though once again, beating him without getting hit forces you to use the smart bombs, as he also has one unavoidable attack. Once you beat the first boss, you then move on to the first shmup stage, and this is where the game becomes really difficult. Yes, everything is colorful, big, and there's tons of parallax scrolling. The problem is that it's too colorful, too big, and too much parallax scrolling. All the colors and effects going on in the background are really distracting, and it takes some major effort to be able to tune out those and just focus on your immediate dangers. Worse still, because your enemies and your ship are so big, it's really easy to get hit. Not to mention that the enemies can come out of any direction, giving you no time to react. I mean, seriously, look at this. How are you supposed to react in time to dodge this? The answer is, you can't. You're simply supposed to memorize these levels and know that they're coming ahead of time, while collecting as many lives or smart bombs along the way. And in fact, some enemies are specifically designed for you to use your smart bomb if you want to take them out. Then of course, this game commits the cardinal sin of giving you multiple paths to choose from, but only one of which is correct. And if you get the wrong one, you either use a smart bomb to get out of the way, or simply take the hit. Luckily, when you die, you do get to spawn right back where you were, and even get to keep all of your power-ups. But trust me, even with that extra hit, these shmup levels will destroy you. The Super Nintendo version also suffers from this issue, though the Amiga and Atari ST originals are once again much easier, because everything moves slower, therefore giving you more time to react. At the end of each shmup level comes another shmup boss, though this time you're in your ship instead of being on a jetpack, meaning that you cannot shoot from the other side like you could before. It's also here that the R-Type influence becomes glaringly obvious. I mean, it was already kind of obvious before, but the level 2 boss is kind of a direct plagiarism of the level 3 boss from R-Type. The problem is that once again, the level design is incredibly sloppy. I generally found it difficult to know where I was supposed to go. But the real issue is that in order to defeat the boss, you're supposed to go here. But there's no way to actually get there. The game just suddenly speeds up and forces you into that location, meaning that once again, you either use a smart bomb or just take the hit and lose a life. The thing is, neither the Super Nintendo or computer ports have this issue. They all give you a way of reaching where you need to be without taking a hit. So this is most likely a leftover from the ROM's beta, and one which honestly should have been fixed for this release. Finally, you have the bonus levels. Basically, once you beat a shmup level, you go to a second shmup level, where all you do is collect keys and coins. The keys will open doors for you in that same stage. But if you miss a key, you automatically lose a life, no matter how many hit points you still had left. Thankfully, for the most part, I did find the keys pretty easy to pick up, with one or two exceptions. The best part is that although coins do not give you any lives, they do add to your score tally, and if you get enough points, you get some extra lives, so the levels are a good way of trying to make up for the game's difficulty. And from there on, it's rinse and repeat. Another on foot stage, followed by a Shmup stage, bonus stage, and their respective boss fights. And after that you have the final level, though I wasn't able to complete this one. The Super Nintendo version does not have the bonus Shmup levels, and instead has these top-down shooter stages similar to Contra 3. I will admit I'm genuinely not a big fan of these stages, so I'm happy to have the coin collecting ones instead. One thing you might notice is that level 1, the Shmup stages and the bonus stages go all out to impress you graphically, but levels 4 and 7 are actually kinda basic, featuring only 2 layers of scrolling. At first I thought that this might have been due to the game being originally unfinished, but the Super Nintendo version is exactly the same, so that's kinda weird. Anyway, one thing I really like about this game is the music, which makes sense as it was composed by Huelsbeck, who was a prominent hero composer for the Commodore 64 and the Amiga. If you want to hear this dude's magic, check out the loading screen song for the Commodore 64 version of R-Type. With that said though, did you know that Jim Power is something of a black mark on his resume? Turns out, when he was composing the soundtrack for this game, the dude was accused of plagiarizing East 3. Here, take a listen. Yeah, that's pretty close there, Chris. But here's the thing, instead of spreading rumors, why don't we ask the man himself? So, hi Chris, thank you so much for coming. Would you like to introduce yourself to anyone who might not have heard of you?
Hi, I'm Chris Huelsbeck. Been doing video game music for almost 40 years now, and live in the US right now, in Arizona, and yeah, glad to be here, answer some questions.
Can you tell us about your work on Jim Power?
Jim Power was the one of the bigger projects after the Tarican series that was kind of like on the height of its development. And I think they actually, Laurie Ciel, they contacted me because they probably heard Tarican and they wanted that kind of sound also in their game. I mixed it up a little bit. In parts it was a little bit more inspired by the Japanese arcade music. But I also had a lot of fun with it, and I think it's after Tarican, it's I think one of my best projects to date.
What about the controversy regarding Jim Power? Can you give us some details on that?
Yeah, that was definitely one of them. I mean, I listened to a lot of game music from Japan back then, and so that must have been in my subconscious when I composed that track for Jim Power. And there's still some differences. If you would like put a musicologist or something on it, they would definitely point out where it's different, but it definitely has the same vibe, and I can see where people say, oh, this is like pure plagiarism, but it wasn't intended to be. It was really just a mistaken coincidence that slipped in there.
Would it be correct to say that the song could be seen as an homage?
Yeah, I would say so. Definitely also could be seen as a homage.
But homages aside, any Amiga fan will tell you that Jim Power has an incredible soundtrack, and the conversion to the Mega Drive sound chip was mostly good. The music renditions of the Amiga and Super Nintendo versions are all here, and they sound pretty good. The songs are great and catchy, and I especially like the Shmup level songs, which are a joy to listen to. but I do feel that the level 1 song, while still good, is a bit of a downgrade from both the Amiga and Super Nintendo versions. Like, listen how much fuller the Super Nintendo version sounds when compared to the Sega version. I mean, they both sound good, but man, that Super Nintendo rendition is incredible. Another downgrade are the voice samples. They sound nice and clear on the Super Nintendo, but garbled on Sega. The weird thing is that even the unfinished beta has better sounding voices than the final release. I mean, yeah, the beta is using Mega Turrican voices as placeholders, but that does not change the fact that they still sound less scratchy than the finalized ones. But you know what? I'm not even gonna speculate on this. So, Chris, what was it like working on the Mega Drive version specifically? Was this version made later, or maybe was the sound driver incomplete? Can you shed some light on this?
It's hard to remember how it came to be, but I think it might have been developed at the same time, but since it was never released, they probably never pushed for the final version of it. So it's possible that it sounds a little bit more unfinished because of that.
So how do you feel about the Mega Drive conversion now that people can hear it?
Not sure about it. I know that the Turrican Mega Drive Mega Turrican conversion has a lot of fans, and I'm very proud of how that came together. I'm not so sure about Jim Power Mega Drive. I think that could have used more polish when I look back on it, but still, I mean, the compositions are there. It's good that we did it, and it's good that it got ultimately a re-release, but I wish I had spent a little bit more time being able to polish it.
Thank you so much, Chris. Are there any final words you'd like to leave Jim Power fans?
I hope Jim Power continues to excite the fans, and hopefully it will also have maybe a follow-up at some point in the future. I would love to make music for that one too.
Oh, interesting. Have you considered doing an arrangement album for Jim Power?
Definitely came up lots of times over the years, and it's not forgotten, and hopefully it will happen at some point to do a proper studio album that is modern and to modern standards. Because there was the CD-ROM version for the PC Engine, which was done, I think, at the same time as the Wikipedia and To Be On Top album developed, but it doesn't hold up to modern sound, and it would definitely benefit from a rewrite.
Chris, thank you so much for coming. You were amazing. So, where can we find you these days?
One thing I would like to definitely for the fans to check out is my Patreon project, where I create a royalty-free music piece every month, and there's over 60 pieces now there for people to download if they join, to support me to create more music like that. And there's definitely compositions on there that sound like Turrican, there's stuff on there that sounds like Jim Power, and there's a lot of other styles, and I explore new ways of creating music, and fans can be part of that for $1 or whatever they might want to contribute. And don't forget, keep watching Stika.
And that's pretty much it. I feel Jim Power for the Sega Genesis is an incredibly difficult and often unfair game, but it's so fun to play. Yes, The game's flaws are clear, but its strengths more than make up for it. And I feel that this is a worthy Sega Genesis port, though it does have a few ups and downs when compared to the other versions. In the end, no matter which version you play, as long as it's jump power, chances are you're going to have a good time. And the good news is that the game is available for pre-purchase on the Piko Interactive website. Not just the Sega version, but also the Super Nintendo, PC Engine, and the Amiga CD32. And as I said before, Piko also fixed some of the issues with the SNES version, like the scrolling, and even added an extra hit point. But I don't own that version, so I can't properly compare them. But they are even releasing an entirely new port for the NES. Oh, and before I forget, I'd like to thank PC Nariatori for setting me up with the Chris Huelsbeck interview and for fact-checking this video. Be sure to check out his article on Jump Power over at Hardcore Gaming 101, link in the pinned comment. Trust me, if you want to know more about Jump Power, this is the guy to ask. But until then, I'll most likely be playing my copy of Jump Power on the Sega Mega Drive for a long time to come, as this was a port that Sega fans waited for almost 30 years, and I'm glad to say that yes, it's good and very much worth it. Hey everyone, thank you for watching Stickage Retro Corner. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell and share this video. All that fun social media stuff. And you can also support me on Patreon. It may not seem like it, but even $1 is a really big help in keeping this channel going. I would also like to thank my newest Patreon supporters: Jerry Langwell, Edwin Zarco, Ryan Caspi, LG5 Films, and Casey Jones. Say hi to Raphael for me, Casey. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Bye!